Judge Harry Webb adjusted his robes and looked at the list of cases for the morning. Traffic court wasn't exciting, but it paid well while he built his name in the small town of Millfield. The bright lights buzzed overhead as he called the next case. Dr. Patricia Brown, speeding violation, 15 miles over in a school zone. A woman walked forward with quiet dignity. Her gray-streaked hair was in a neat bun, and though she wore simple clothes, a blue cardigan and dark trousers, she had a presence that made people notice her. She stood tall at the front of the court, waiting calmly. "How do you plead to the charge, Ms. Brown?" Judge Webb asked without looking up from his papers. "It's Dr. Brown, Your Honor," she corrected in a gentle voice. "And I plead guilty with an explanation." Judge Webb sighed quietly. Everyone had an explanation. He heard them all day, every day. "Go ahead," he said, trying not to sound too bored. "I was rushing to the university hospital," Dr. Brown explained. "One of my students had been in a bad accident, and I got an urgent call. I know it doesn't make breaking the law right, but I felt the situation was an emergency." The judge finally looked up with the stern look he had practiced many times in the mirror. "The law doesn't care about our personal emergencies, Dr. Brown. School zones exist to keep children safe. Your rushing could have hurt someone." Something changed in her eyes, not anger, but something deeper. She looked at him with a hint of recognition studying his face. "The fine is $250, Judge Webb declared firmly. "Next case." Dr. Brown nodded, accepting the judgment without argument. As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at him. "You know, Judge Webb, I once had a student who wrote an excellent paper about empathy in the justice system. He argued that true justice means understanding the human story behind every case." The judge's pen stopped moving. Something about her voice pulled at his memory. That student believed the letter of the law should be balanced with compassion to achieve its true purpose, she continued. He had remarkable insight for someone so young. Judge Webb looked up again, really seeing her for the first time. The warm brown eyes, the slight tilt of her head when she spoke, memories suddenly flooded back to him like a wave. "Professor Brown?" he whispered, forgetting for a moment that he was in his courtroom. She smiled, the same smile that had encouraged him through 4 difficult years at university. "It's been a long time, Harry. 20 years, I believe." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Webb realized who was standing before him. This wasn't just any speeding case. This was Professor Patricia Brown, the woman who had shaped his entire career, who had believed in him when no one else did. He had been one of her favorite students, always passionate about justice. He had written paper after paper about how the legal system could be more human, more understanding. And now here he was, treating her just like any other case number, not even bothering to look at her face. Judge Webb felt his cheeks grow warm, with shame. He had become exactly the kind of judge he once criticized, cold, distant, more concerned with rules than with people. We should talk after court," he managed to say, his voice suddenly not as firm as usual. Dr. Brown nodded, still with that knowing smile. "I think that would be good, Harry. Very good indeed." As she walked back to her seat, Judge Webb found it hard to focus on the next case. His mind kept going back to his university days, to Professor Brown's classroom where he had first fallen in love with the idea of justice. He remembered the idealistic young man he had been, determined to change the system from within. What had happened to that young man? When had he started going through the motions, treating people like numbers, not even looking them in the eye? "TBU." Judge glanced at Dr. Brown sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom waiting. He knew this chance meeting wasn't just about a speeding ticket. It was about remembering who he was meant to be. During the court break, Judge Webb invited Dr. Marlowe Brown to his office. His hand shook slightly as he poured 2 cups of tea. The small room was neat but plain, with law books lining the walls and a single plant that needed watering. "I didn't recognize you," he admitted, shame coloring his voice. "You were always focused on your papers rather than faces," she said, accepting the tea with a small smile. "Even in my front row lectures." Judge Webb sat down heavily in his chair. The memories came flooding back, Her ethics of law course had changed his life path. She had been the only black female professor in the law department, breaking barriers with quiet determination. "Your class was why I chose to become a judge," he confessed. "Your lectures on justice and fairness, they shaped everything I believed about the law." Dr. Brown took a sip of her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "And yet you find me without hearing my full story," she observed. There was no anger in her voice, just a gentle observation. The judge looked down at his desk. "What happened to the student I knew?" she asked. "The one who wrote that justice requires looking at the whole person, not just their actions?" "Life happened," he said quietly. "Years of seeing the same excuses, the same stories. It wears you down." Dr. Brown put her cup down. "The student I was rushing to see, her name is Emma. She reminds me of you 20 years ago, passionate about changing the world. She was hit by a car while at a peaceful protest about prison conditions. Right now she's fighting for her life." Judge Webb felt the weight of her words sink into him. He had become exactly what he once hated, a judge who saw cases, not people. "Why did you keep my paper?" he asked, noticing the yellowed pages peeking out of her bag. "Because it reminds me why I teach," she said simply. "Sometimes when I doubt whether I'm making a difference, I read your words. Your passion gave me hope." Judge Webb swallowed hard. "I was so sure I would change things, that I would never become like the judges I criticized." "It's not too late, Harry," Dr. Brown said softly. "The system doesn't change overnight. It changes one decision at a time, one person at a time." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Your Honor, court resumes in 5 minutes," his clerk announced. As Dr. Brown stood to leave, Judge Webb felt panic rising. There was so much more to say, so much he wanted to ask her. "Will you stay for the rest of the session?" he asked. She nodded. "I'd like to see the Harry Webb I once knew. I think he's still in there somewhere." When court resumed, something had changed. Judge Webb looked at each person who came before him. Really looked at them. The young mother with 3 children who couldn't afford to fix her brake lights. The elderly man who had forgotten to renew his license. The teenager who had been speeding to get his sick dog to the vet. For each case, he asked questions, listening with real interest to their answers. The fines he gave were fair but tempered with understanding. Some he reduced, others he allowed to be paid over time. From her seat at the back of the courtroom, Dr. Brown watched with quiet satisfaction. This was the student she remembered, the one who believed in justice with a human face. At the end of the session, she approached him again. "That was more like the Harry Webb I knew," she said. "One thing has been bothering me," he admitted. "Why didn't you tell me who you were right away? Why let me find you first?" Dr. Brown smiled. "Would you have believed anything I said if I had? Or would you have thought I was trying to use our connection to avoid the consequences?" Judge Webb nodded slowly, understanding. "You wanted me to see for myself what I'd become." "Sometimes we need a mirror held up to us," she said. 20 years ago, you were that mirror for me, showing me why teaching mattered. Today, perhaps, I could be that mirror for you." The judge looked at the stack of cases waiting for tomorrow. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of the old passion returning. "I'd like to hear more about your student," he said, "about Emma. And maybe there's something I can do to help." Dr. Brown's eyes lit up with hope. "I believe there is, Harry. I truly believe there is." The next morning, Judge Webb sat in his car outside the hospital for a long time before finding the courage to go in. He carried a small bunch of flowers and a card. Dr. Brown had told him which room to find Emma in, but now that he was here, he felt nervous. What would he say to this young woman he had never met, a student who reminded Dr. Brown of himself 20 years ago? Finally, he took a deep breath and walked into the hospital. The smell of cleaning products filled his nose as he made his way to the 3rd floor. Room 312 had the door half open. "Judge," Webb knocked softly. "Come in," called a tired but friendly voice. He stepped inside to find a young woman sitting up in bed. Her arm was in a cast, and she had cuts on her face that were starting to heal. Despite her injuries, her eyes were bright and alert. "Emma, I'm Harry Webb, Dr. Brown's former student." Emma's face lit up with recognition. "The judge, Dr. Brown told me you might visit. She's been telling me about you for years." This surprised Judge Webb. "She has?" "Oh yes," Emma said, adjusting herself in the bed. "She uses your papers as examples in class, especially the one about seeing the person, not just the crime." Judge Webb felt a mix of pride and shame. Dr. Brown had been sharing his work all these years, while he had been forgetting the very ideas he once believed in so strongly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, putting the flowers on her bedside table. "Better every day," Emma said. "The doctors say I was lucky." They talked for a while, about her studies, her hopes for the future. She wanted to work in prison reform, to help people who had made mistakes find their way back to society. "It's hard to change the system," Judge Webb warned. Emma smiled. "That's what they said to Dr. Brown 30 years ago when she wanted to teach law. That's what they said to you when you wrote about compassionate justice. Some things are worth fighting for even when they're hard." Her words hit him hard. This young woman, lying in a hospital bed with broken bones, had more courage and hope than he had kept in his comfortable judge's chair. "What happened at the protest?" he asked quietly. Emma's face grew serious. "We were standing outside the prison peacefully, just holding signs about better conditions, better chances for people to rebuild their lives after release. Someone driving by didn't like our message. They swerved toward us. I pushed my friend out of the way." Judge Webb felt sick. "Have they caught the driver?" "Yes," Emma said. "But I've been thinking, I want to meet them, to understand why they did it. Maybe even to forgive them, if I can." Judge Webb stared at her in amazement. "After what they did to you?" "Hating them won't heal my bones any faster," Emma said simply. "Dr. Brown taught us that justice without healing is just another form of punishment." As if summoned by her name, Dr. Brown appeared in the doorway. She smiled when she saw Judge Webb. "I see you two have met," she said, coming in and putting a bag of books on Emma's table. "Homework," she explained with a wink. "Just because you're in hospital doesn't mean your brain stops working." Emma groaned, but her smile showed she didn't really mind. "Harry, could I speak with you outside for a moment?" Dr. Brown asked. In the hallway, she told him. "The driver who hit Emma is appearing in court next week for dangerous driving and attempted assault." Judge Webb nodded. "It won't be in my courtroom. That's criminal court, not traffic violations." "I know," Dr. Brown said. "But Emma wants to speak at the hearing, to ask for restorative justice instead of just punishment. She could use some guidance from someone who knows the system." Judge Webb understood what she was asking. "You want me to help her prepare her statement? To coach her on how to speak to the judge?" "Who better?" Dr. Brown asked. "You know what judges listen for, what moves them, and you once believed in exactly what Emma is fighting for." Judge Webb looked back through the door at the young woman reading one of her textbooks, determined to keep learning even while recovering. "Once believed," he said quietly. "Maybe I still do. I just forgot for a while." Dr. Brown squeezed his arm gently. "Then help her remember for all of us." For the first time in years, Judge Webb felt truly useful. Not just processing cases, but actually helping someone navigate the system he knew so well. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised, "with some books of my own." For the next week, Judge Webb visited Emma every day after court. They worked together on her statement for the hearing, carefully choosing words that would explain her feelings without attacking the driver who had hurt her. "The judge needs to see that you're not driven by anger," Judge Webb explained as they sat in the hospital garden. Emma was now able to move around in a wheelchair, enjoying the fresh air and sunshine. "I'm not angry," Emma said, looking down at her cast. "I'm sad. Sad that someone could be so full of hate that they would try to hurt people they don't even know." Judge Webb nodded. "That's powerful. Lead with that." As they worked, Dr. Brown often joined them, bringing food and offering suggestions. It felt to Judge Webb like being back in university again, the three of them working together on an important project. But this time, he was helping to teach rather than being taught. On his way home one evening, Judge Webb took a different route through town. He found himself driving past the prison where Emma had been protesting. He slowed down, looking at the high walls and barbed wire. How many people had he sent behind those walls over the years? How many lives had been affected by his decisions? The next morning in traffic court, Judge Webb surprised everyone by coming down from his bench during a break. He walked around the courtroom, introducing himself to people waiting for their cases to be heard. He asked about their lives, their families. One old man had been a sailor. A young woman was studying to be a nurse. A middle-aged man had lost his job and was struggling to pay his bills. When court resumed, Judge Webb's rulings were still fair, but they were also more flexible. For the man who had lost his job, he arranged community service instead of a fine he couldn't pay. For a young driver with too many passengers in his car, he ordered him to attend a safe driving course. His clerk, Mary, watched with surprise. "You're different this week," she said during lunch. "I met someone who reminded me why I became a judge in the first place," he replied. On the day of Emma's hearing, Judge Webb took the morning off from his own court to sit in the public gallery. Dr. Brown sat beside him, both of them there to support Emma. The driver who had hit Emma was a young man named Robert. He sat with his head down, not making eye contact with anyone. His lawyer spoke about his client's momentary lapse in judgment and his clean record before this incident. When it was Emma's turn to speak, Judge Webb held his breath. She wheeled herself to the front of the courtroom, her notes in her lap. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I stand before you, sit before you, as both a victim and a person who believes in second chances." She spoke for 5 minutes about her injuries, her recovery, and her hopes for the future. But most powerfully, she spoke about forgiveness. "I don't want Robert's life to be defined by his worst decision, just as I don't want mine to be defined by being a victim. What I ask for today is not the harshest punishment possible, but the most healing outcome for everyone involved." She proposed that Robert should do community service at a rehabilitation center for people with spinal injuries to understand the impact reckless driving can have. She asked that he also participate in a restorative justice program where they could talk about what had happened and why. "Locking him away won't heal my bones, and it won't heal whatever pain or anger led him to do what he did," she concluded. "Justice should be about making things better, not just making them even." When Emma finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. Even Robert had looked up, his eyes filled with tears as he listened to her words. The judge, a stern-looking woman with decades of experience, studied Emma carefully. "That's a very enlightened view, Ms. Parker. Not many victims would be so forgiving." "I had good teachers," Emma replied, glancing back at Dr. Brown and Judge Webb. After the hearing, as they waited for the judge's decision, Robert approached Emma in the hallway. Judge Webb tensed, ready to step in if needed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Robert said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm truly sorry, not just because I got caught, but because I hurt you. I didn't see you as a real person that day. I just saw someone I disagreed with." Emma nodded. "That's why I want us to talk. Really talk. So we can see each other as people." As Judge Webb watched them, he felt something shift inside himself. All these years, he had been doing his job, following the law, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing the people too. He had become just like Robert, seeing cases, not humans with stories and struggles and hopes. It was time for that to change. 6 months later, Judge Webb stood in the community center, watching as people filled the seats. The room was simple, but warm, with posters about justice and second chances on the walls. At the front was a table with 3 chairs and a small sign that read, "Community Justice Panel." Emma sat in one of those chairs, no longer in a wheelchair but walking with a slight limp, a reminder of the accident that had changed so many lives. She looked nervous but determined in her smart blue suit. The other chair was for Judge Webb himself. After today's session, he would return to his regular courtroom, but for the past 6 months he had been helping Emma set up this community justice program. The third chair was for Dr. Brown, who had supported them both through the entire process. Are you ready? Dr. Brown asked, approaching with cups of tea for all of them. As ready as I'll ever be, Emma replied, smoothing her notes for the 10th time. Judge Webb smiled. You'll be brilliant. You've done all the hard work already. The Community Justice Panel was Emma's idea, born during her recovery. Instead of certain minor offenses going straight to court, people could choose to come here first. They would meet with those they had harmed, talk about what happened, and work out how to make things right. The first case today was a young boy who had broken a shop window. The shop owner, an older man named George, sat in the front row looking skeptical. Do you think this will actually work? He had asked Judge Webb earlier. The boy needs to learn his lesson. Give it a chance, Judge Webb had replied. Sometimes understanding works better than punishment. As the session began, Emma welcomed everyone and explained the process. Then she invited the boy Tommy to speak. I was angry, Tommy admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My dad lost his job and we had to move to a smaller flat. I saw the toys in the window and got mad because I couldn't have them anymore. George's face softened slightly as he listened. I didn't think about who owned the shop, Tommy continued. I just saw stuff I couldn't have. When it was George's turn, he explained how the broken window had cost him money he could barely afford, and how scared he had been when the alarm went off in the middle of the night. I thought someone was breaking in to hurt me, he said. I live alone above the shop. Judge Webb watched as understanding dawned on Tommy's face. The boy had never considered that a real person lived there, that his actions had scared someone. By the end of the session, they had reached an agreement. Tommy would work in George's shop on weekends to pay for the window. George, learning about Tommy's family situation, also offered to teach him about running a business. I never had children of my own, George explained. Maybe I could teach you a few things. As they shook hands, Judge Webb caught Dr. Brown's eye. This was exactly what they had hoped for. Justice that healed rather than just punished. After the session, as people filed out, Robert, the driver who had hit Emma, arrived. He had completed his community service at the rehabilitation center and was now volunteering there regularly. The judge in his case had accepted Emma's suggestion for restorative justice, and Robert had become one of the program's strongest supporters. Sorry, I missed the first session, he said. My support group ran late. You'll be here for the next one, Emma assured him. We need your perspective too. Judge Webb watched their easy conversation with amazement. The victim and the person who had harmed her, now working together to help others. It seemed impossible, yet here it was, happening before his eyes. Later, as they cleared up the room, Dr. Brown handed Judge Webb an envelope. What's this? He asked. Open it and see, she said with a smile. Inside was a framed newspaper article about their new community justice program. The headline read, Local Judge and Law Student Pioneer, New Approach to Justice. They interviewed the judge who handled Robert's case, Dr. Brown explained. She said your influence and Emma's courage inspired her to try something different. Judge Webb felt his throat tighten with emotion. One case at a time, he murmured. That's how change happens, Dr. Brown agreed. One person, one decision, one chance at understanding. As they walked out together, teacher, former student, and new student, Judge Webb thought about how a simple traffic violation had led to all of this, how being recognized by someone who knew who he truly was had helped him find himself again. The next morning he would return to his traffic court. But he would be a different judge than he was 6 months ago. He would look people in the eye. He would listen to their stories. He would remember that behind every case was a human being with hopes, fears, and the capacity for change. Just as he had changed, and as he took his place on the bench, he kept a small framed quote on his desk, words he had written 20 years ago as a student. Justice without compassion is just another form of cruelty. True justice heals.